Good evening and welcome to Law Talk, the show that brings the Constitution, the law, and the events of today to you each month. Yes, and tonight, Mark Malachowski and myself, James Barrett, are very fortunate. We have Tierney Plum from Biz Now, an investigative journalist. And Tierney, why don't you give us a very brief overview of your background?
Thank you. So I hail from the D.C. area. I originally started working at the Washington Business Journal as a reporter back in 2007, moved to San Diego, started covering biotech, real estate, military, that kind of thing, and then now I've been up here for 2 years in the Bay Area at Biz Now.
And at Biz Now, what type of stories do you usually cover?
A range, focus on real estate, business news, locally focused Bay Area topics.
Well, tonight we have some topics you might not normally be covering at Biz Now. And what is our first topic tonight, Mark?
Well, tonight we've got Barry Bonds walks on obstruction of justice charge.
Barry Bonds, we're talking about the San Francisco slugger that holds the home run record.
762 home runs, broke Hank Aaron's long-standing career record of 755. Also, Bonds hit the single-year record of 73 home runs in 1 year.
Well, that's a pretty outstanding record, and I'm sure, Tierney, you're familiar with Mr. Bonds. But, Mark, how is that brought to Law Talk tonight?
Well, Barry got in a little trouble with U.S. Attorney Matthew Perella. And Barry Bonds, he was accused of using steroids to enhance his performance.
Well, was there any evidence that he had used steroids?
Well, he had, there was a Kimberly Bell, who was his mistress or girlfriend at one time. She did some interviews with Playboy, did an interview at Howard Stern, and then eventually ended up testifying at trial, saying that she thought she was doing, she never actually saw him use steroids, but she thought that some symptoms, he showed some symptoms of steroid use.
Well, how did that come to Law Talk tonight, Tierney?
So the most recent development was that the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals actually reversed the conviction of his obstruction of justice back in 2003. So now here we are, and he is still being held from the Cooperstown Baseball Hall of Fame, but was actually just inducted to the Bay Area Baseball Hall of Fame. So obviously he has a lot of local fans still, despite this past that he has, that he's trying to overturn. He still thinks he has a chance at the big Hall of Fame one day.
Well, I understand the obstruction of justice charge arose from his testimony at a grand jury hearing. Mm-hmm. But I also heard that at the testimony of the grand jury hearing wasn't obstruction of justice, but was simply not precise. Is that what happened, Mark?
Well, what happened, he had a meandering answer. And he went on giving some history, but eventually he denied. He said no. So it was a meandering answer, but he finally got around to answering the question. And so it was a very odd thing to really say that he was obstructing justice. What the Fed said was because of his answer was so vague that they had to continue investigating, and that cost them a lot of extra money. But it was kind of a roundabout obstruction of justice charge. It's very unusual.
Yeah, well, what I understand, it was a felony. They did convict him of a felony because of that.
Right.
But my question is, how can you convict somebody of a felony of obstruction of justice when they're not really obstructing justice? Isn't that what the Ninth Circuit really looked at, Tierney?
Mm-hmm. And I think now the question is, well, Matthew Perella, is he going to want to push it farther? Does he want to take it to Supreme Court, all the way to Supreme Court? And I guess the question there is, how much money, right, does he have to do that? Because that's going to take a lot to do it.
Well, the feds have unlimited resources because they can print the money. But I think what happens when you're a U.S. attorney, you know, it's a matter of pride. I mean, you know, you go up to the Ninth, you get reversed to the Ninth Circuit. That's a pretty big, pretty big item, and he may want to try and clear his name by going up to the Supreme Court and see if he can be successful there. Might backfire him.
Well, I understand that the Ninth Circuit actually, on a 3-judge panel, actually sided with the district attorney, and it was only when it was appealed en banc for the entire Ninth Circuit that it was actually overturned, and the appeal was granted on behalf of Mr. Bonds.
But there was some, I think, some pretty stern language that the court used, and said that, you know, they've never quite seen anything like this or something of that nature. So they were a little bit surprised that someone could be convicted of an obstruction of justice when they actually just kind of give a vague answer and didn't actually, outright perjure themselves.
Well, I understand that besides the woman that gave the Playboy interview and what was her name?
Kimberly Bell.
Kimberly Bell. I understand beyond that there was no evidence that he ever actually used steroids of any sort.
Well, Kimberly Bell said that his head got bigger because he was using the steroids, and some of his private parts got smaller, and that was the evidence. And he became more irritable, and that was the evidence of the
Acne.
acne and things like that. Yeah, some of these were and then there was a guy named a fellow named Anderson who she said always had a satchel with him, and she was inferring that he would take that into the bath or in the bedroom near the kitchen, and he'd inject him there. But she never saw that. But Anderson never talked.
Well, I understand that Anderson actually went to federal prison for contempt of court for not testifying.
I think he did a year.
He did a year, and then he was released because they felt it was almost a habeas corpus issue at that point.
Right.
And the fact is, he never testified against Barry Bonds.
Right.
So we actually have no direct testimony from any source that indicates that he was actually juicing.
Except the big head.
Except for the big head, and I guess the trainer at the Giants noticed that when his ball cap didn't fit him anymore. That
If the hat does not fit,
then you must have quit.
Must have quit.
Yeah, but in this case, it was the hat didn't fit. You have to convict.
So
I think that's more the story in this case.
So, Attorney, what do you think of the public outlook on Barry Bonds now? How do you think how does this affect I guess the baseball writers are very important, and whether he gets in the Hall of Fame, what's that look like for him?
Right. I mean, I think a lot of people think the court of public opinion weighs heavier than this obstruction of justice charge being reversed. I think even though he has a lot of local fans, Giants fans, I think nationwide overall, people just have a bad taste in their mouth about him, along with other big players like Roger Clemens and now A-Rod too, that just kind of have, shown that they might have used steroids, may not, and, people are quick to judge, so.
So do you, with that answer, you're kind of going because it was actually another person that was very famous in this home run derby that was going on at this time was Mark McGwire. And what's interesting about him, he finally admitted it. And you've had several players that initially denied it, then admitted it and everything, but does it feel like to you that even though that he may be vindicated in the court system, that he may never be in the Baseball Hall of Fame? Right,
because I think he has to have a certain percentage of the writers okay it, and I think he hasn't been elected into it, I guess, in his first 3 years of eligibility. I think maybe now he has a little bit more confidence now that he's been elected into the local Bay Area Sports Hall of Fame. And I think he just said a quote recently, I believe eventually the right thing will be done in regards to the Cooperstown induction. So I think he still has hope, even though this case might drag on, who knows, to the Supreme Court, and then who knows.
Well, the whole question is that when you're talking about breaking records that other people have set in the past when these like steroids were not available, you were talking about was Hank Aaron's record?
Right.
Is that you were talking
755.
about? Yeah. When you're talking about records being broken by people that did not use steroids, for sure, that if you look at the historical perspective of baseball being America's sport or America's game, I can tend to agree with you that when somebody's found to be a cheater, it's almost like it won't matter. It won't matter if he was totally vindicated, and if everyone. And the owner of Belco said, I never, ever gave him steroids, and nobody ever gave him steroids, and he never used steroids, even with all that, just because of the past.
Well, he did have this Kimberly Bell accusing him, so that was testimony. I think she testified for an hour and a half, saying that there was a lot of circumstantial evidence that he was using the steroids, and then he, like I said, he hung around with Mr. Anderson, and that this was all very suspicious, and there was these physiological changes and all that kind of stuff. But then other people might argue that she just, this was sour grapes because I guess she was a mistress, and then he went around and got married again, and there was some cities, he said there were wife cities, and he didn't want Bell visiting those cities because his wife might show up, and so there might be other reasons for a testimony, you know, that
Okay,
were
well,
based on personal reasons.
I think what we ought to do then is we ought to wait and see what happens and see whether the district attorney actually decides to bring this to the Supreme Court, because that's where it's going to be going next. And if he decides that he's well funded and he can take it away and take it to the Supreme Court, I'd be interested to see how our Justice Roberts and the crew are going to handle this. So why don't we move on to our second subject tonight, Mark? What is that subject?
Well, the next subject is Hot Mike burns millionaire heir Durst. Durst's worth was $80 or $100 million, inherited a lot of money, came from a rich family, also I think did some real estate business, and who's recently doing an HBO documentary. So Tierney, why don't you tell us a little bit about that documentary?
So the documentary, pretty explosive. It aired this year, 6 parts. Basically, it follows the 1982 disappearance of his wife, the shooting of Susan Berman, his old college friend in Beverly Hills, and the brutal slaying of a Galveston, Texas neighbor that he was living with. Strangely enough, here he is, a millionaire living in a $300 apartment Galveston home, dismembers his body, admits to it. He agrees to go on TV just to kind of like clear his name and kind of have his side of the story shown, but the whole thing kind of blows up in his face because he ends up having a hot mic at the end of the documentary, admits in the bathroom, yes, I did kill all of them.
Yeah,
And meanwhile, he's gone away with all of it so
Wait
far.
a minute, was he talking to himself when he admitted this?
Yes, he was rambling by himself. He's like, oh shoot, they
Yeah, he
just
was
showed
in
up
the
some
bathroom.
evidence.
Apparently, he was using the facilities there and relieving himself. And he said, I think the interview had brought up the Beverly spelling, because he had left a little note for the police, or they alleged he left a note
Right.
for the police at the Hollywood murder, or at the Beverly Hills murder, right?
So yes.
And that had come up that this kind of matched your writing. It was a misspelling of Beverly. And so I think he's kind of mumbling about that. And he said, what the hell did I do? Kill them all, of course. And he kind of had a hot mic on. He forgot he had the mic on. And then all of a sudden there was a lot more attention on this. And so instead of this HBO series clearing his name, they kind of clouded things again.
Well, I was under the impression that his own attorney had told him not to go on this series and not to do this series. And I believe that, in my opinion, this person was so arrogant that he just felt as though that I'm going to get away with anything that I do. Mm-hmm. And the question about whether or not he was involved with murders was answered in Galveston when he literally used a self-defense defense in court after he chopped a body up and then tried to throw the parts away in Galveston Bay. I don't know about you, Mark, but in my years as a criminal defense attorney, the last person I'd want to try to say that it was self-defense is somebody that chopped the body up and where the head was missing. What about you, Mark? What do you feel about that?
What the defense said on that is that he had an altercation with the next-door neighbor, that he killed him in self-defense, and then he panicked and he chopped the body up in a panic.
Well, I don't know about you, Tierney, but I don't know. Would that be a normal course if you felt that you had to shoot somebody in self-defense, that you would automatically turn to chopping the body up as some type of
No.
vindication for your self-defense?
No, and I think, yeah, he did freak. He, in court, kept saying he can't remember even doing it, chopping up the body. He just, it was a methodology type thing. And he, there was a New York Times headline that was so funny. And New York Times isn't funny with their headlines usually, but it said something like, Durst, who cuts up body, is, not guilty. So it's, the whole thing, people couldn't believe it, but it kind of speaks to being in Texas. I hate to say that, and getting away with something on self-defense and murder, but.
Well, I don't know if there's anything particular about Texas about it, but it seemed like it was a pretty good defense. And that, but then he went and did this HBO show, The Jinx, The Life and Deaths of Robert Durst, which maybe wasn't the smartest thing to do. Now, the thing is, the first person that we know about her was the wife, Kathleen Durst. And how did she meet her end? What happened to her? Was she shot?
So they never found a body.
Okay, so we don't know. Okay.
He was the last person, apparently, to see her
he dropped her
alive.
off at the subway station or something, the train station or something.
Right. They had a house in New York, and then she was going to head back to their house in Manhattan, and he dropped her off. This is what he claims. Dropped her off at the train station, I guess the family kind of fed some information to the media saying that the doorman saw her arrive. Later, a PI found out that that was never the case, so that he was basically the last one who
So
saw
they
her
never
alive.
found the body on that one. Yeah.
Right.
She's
And
still,
which bay
he
was
lied
that
about-
near?
no, she's still riding. She's still riding the train. She's on the train somewhere. Okay, and so the next one, then Berman. Now, tell us a little bit about Berman. Why do you think Berman might have disappeared?
So he then was the case was reopened in 2000 of the disappearance of Kathleen Durst. And so, jump forward 20 years, and apparently a DA in New York was headed to Beverly Hills to interview this woman, Susan Berman, who he was college friends with. And she apparently knew some information about Kathleen's disappearance. And so right before they were going to interview her, she died. She was executed in the back of the head.
Yeah, and wasn't that?
And then that was
wasn't
the one. And where was the location?
That was
the-
Beverly
Beverly Hills, and that's where they found the note. And who was the DA? What was that DA?
that Judge Janine Pirro, who actually has
now the judge,
a
yeah.
television show and was a famous judge and famous prosecutor, extremely successful and very aggressive.
And I think that
In her opinion, she said Robert Durst killed every person that he's ever been accused of, and probably more that they don't know about. So it was actually she was about ready to take a flight out to Beverly Hills to interview Miss Sherman, and mysteriously
He was also in California
Berman,
at the
and
time.
he was in California at the same time.
Durst was in
Durst was.
California.
Yeah,
but
and
upstate.
mysteriously she was shot in the back of the head before
Right.
that interview took place.
Right. The big smoking gun, right, was
And
this
that was,
letter.
but that's where he left, or somebody left a note, something about, you find her at this address or something like that.
Right. Put a letter in the mail to her address in Beverly Hills, misspelled the word Beverly, sent it to the police saying cadaver at her address so that they would find her body. Years later, this is actually during the documentary, they
Right.
discover this.
And I think that's what might have triggered this muttering.
Right. So they
When he was
find a
confronted with
letter
these notes, yeah.
that Durst had written to Susan a couple of years back. Just an innocent letter, a check or something, and he had misspelled Beverly.
Yeah.
So
And they had
that
a handwriting
basically is
expert.
it, that, if you don't spell correctly, if you don't use spell check, you can get a lot of trouble.
Yeah, well, let's move on from spell check. And by the way, that's true, and I do use spell check because I realize that if you're not paying attention, you can definitely write things you never wanted to see on a page. So what's our final subject for tonight, Mark?
Okay, so we'll move back on. Okay, so this is going back to, the famous frat house. What was that famous frat house movie?
Animal House?
Animal House. Yeah, so Animal House. So
And
everybody,
that would be with John Belushi.
Yeah, everybody remembers Animal House, and so people, frat houses have a reputation of, drinking and partying and other kind of thing like that. But then recently, the Rolling Stones got into it with, I think it was Phi Kappa Pi at University of Virginia, and all kinds of things were alleged. So what happened on that one recently?
So the reporter basically, in a few words or less, she did a sloppy job. She used one source on this story, a Rolling Stone reporter wanting to, kind of uncover sexual crimes on college campuses. She went to UVA, found a girl to talk to. She told her whole story. She didn't, go out to seek this guy named Drew, who was the accused attacker, and his friends as part of the gang rape that maybe took place, but and Columbia Journalism School kind of did a review of her story, found all these holes in it, found that, that potentially the school, or I'm sorry, the magazine could be liable for, being sued.
Yeah,
We're
what-
talking about defamation of
Defamation.
character
Yeah.
of the entire frat house, the fraternity, and the question is, was there a real person named Jackie who was raped ever?
She definitely exists, but Washington Post was the first to realize that, the party that she was at where it apparently took place never happened. This guy that she apparently worked with at the Aquatic Center didn't exist. So it was definitely the fault on the reporter, her editors. They've now gotten their big media defense team in place. The fraternity is not sued yet, but the most recent development is that the dean, who's named in the story, actually did sue this week for $8 million.
Okay, so the dean, I think that is a Nicole
Yeah.
Ivamo?
Aramo, yeah.
Okay. I think didn't the Rolling Stone story say that Jackie went and talked to the dean. Dean told her you shouldn't report this because we didn't want UVA to get a reputation as a rape school. Was that part of the story, or something implied about that?
Right.
And what did the dean say about that accusation or allegation from the Rolling Stone?
So she has since received lots of hate mail from across the country, saying she's a worthless piece of trash. And so she's suing also, on behalf of UVA administration, saying that this, suing for libel, I believe. Yes. So.
But I mean, did she deny? Did she admit that she's told Jackie this, or she denied that?
I think that is in the complaint, right? That it didn't go how she.
Okay, so
depicted
she
in the
didn't tell her
article.
not to report.
So this is another one of the holes in the story is that did the reporter
I think
for
it's Sabrina Rubin.
Yeah,
apparently.
Rubin
And I think
Ederle.
she's a freelance reporter.
She's a freelance reporter. She's not even an employee of
Contributor,
Rolling
yeah.
Stone. But Rolling Stone chose to publish this. But did Rolling Stone talk to the dean prior to publishing this story?
To fact check everything, I believe they did try to contact all the sources that were named in the story, but as far as the main source that Sabrina talked to, it was only this Jackie, and that was the main problem. She really didn't have many sides to the story. Only what Jackie's account was, she recounted.
Okay, so was there any physical evidence? Did Jackie file a police report after this happened? What happened to that? What did the police say about all this?
No, so the police went ahead. I mean, after the story came out,
and
UVA
then
was
of course
very
came
much
out
like,
sometime after the alleged incident, like a month or two later or something like that?
well, this is what not until after the story came out. The Charlottesville Police Department, when investigated, found that there was no evidence that a rape took place. So that came out in March, and then the Columbia Journalism Review came in saying that the story, had a lot of problems with it, and then the fraternity now has decided to sue, but there's also speculation, is that a good idea? Because if a fraternity sues, a lot of skeletons might come out of their closet if they decide to, they want to pursue
But
that.
the dean's thinking of suing it.
She already did, for sure.
She did.
Well,
The
I have
dean
a
has,
question.
The dean has filed on behalf of the university.
Was it
Right.
was it the Charlottesville police not finding any credible evidence? Is that what started triggering other organizations to start investigating the story to see whether it's true or not?
I think Washington Post was the first one to try to, actually go in and fact check. I think.
But that was after it was published, right?
Right.
Okay. Okay.
Now
so
it's
the
been
other
retracted
question,
in full,
so,
right?
So
the story.
basically, this Drew person, apparently Jackie said, or maybe the article said, that she knew him from working with him at the swimming pool or something like that, and that he was a student at UVA. Now, where is he now?
I think it's a
And
mystery
he was also
figure.
supposed to be. He was supposed to be a member of the frat house, right?
Right.
And has he been located? Where's he?
I think it's a mystery figure. I mean, I think the friends that were named in the story after it happened to Jackie, they definitely think something traumatic happened to her, but as far as this guy Drew and the people she claimed assaulted him, they can't track them down. They don't know where they are.
So I mean, does Drew exist, or is he? Are they hiding him in the basement of Phi Kappa Pi? Or,
Phi Kappa Pi.
I mean, where is Drew? I mean, or did he never exist, or is he run into hiding, or what happened?
Right.
Here?
I think that's unclear. I mean, I think.
Oh, you would think. No, well, you would think that they could probably look at if he was going to the university, worked at the aquatic center. How many people work at the aquatic center? It's got to be like 10 people.
How many
Right.
people named Drew work at the aquatic
no
center,
guy.
and they're a member of
Phi Kappa.
Phi Kappa Pi?
I mean, it's like
I'm having a hard time trying to understand. Wait a minute. You know the Rolling Stone has done some outstanding.
Well, the Rolling Stone. No, wait a minute. The Rolling Stone. No, the Rolling Stone doesn't roll a few of their own.
They may roll too many of their own, but they still do great journalism. And they've been known for 35 years of doing great journalism. Why would the Rolling Stone go to this extreme to print a story without any material fact being checked?
Yeah.
What's your opinion on that?
Right, as a writer, I mean, I think the whole thing, everyone, loses because, journalism loses some credibility because of someone like her. The editors, I think one of the editors, when he found out that all this was happening, was like, this was the worst day of my life, because it does fall on the people who are supposed to fact check the writers that they hire to do stories.
Well, I
And
mean, I think it was just too good. I mean, it's such a great story, you know. Like
Oh,
there's
yeah, it's a-
because UVA is a very privileged university, right? So it's the 1%, white male, 1%, gain rate.
Heaven forbid.
I mean, that's a great
And
story.
with Hillary Clinton
Thomas
coming up
Jefferson.
for office, what better way than to show a woman was raped?
You know, but I'm
And
just
the
saying
next
that
thing
when
you
the,
story,
and then the
it's got to
dean-
be a woman
No,
president
and the
because
dean,
a woman was raped.
The dean was a woman president, right? And she's telling women who have been raped, don't report it. We cover this up. I mean, this is a great story. I mean, it's pretty hard to pass up.
Yeah, and you know,
Unfortunately,
I
there
gotta
is-
tell you, was this a Pulitzer Prize-winning story if it was true?
If it was true, this would be
It could have been.
crazy.
It could have easily been.
Sabrina was on every news show talking about,
Yeah.
you know, her journalism, and then all of a sudden her Twitter
No, but
account
I'm
went
just
blank,
saying, I'm just
and
saying,
she
you know,
was never
this,
heard from
if it
again.
had been a real story, I mean, this
If
was
Sabrina still, can we still contact Sabrina?
I'm
you get her on
glad
the
I'm
show.
not Sabrina.
No,
Yeah.
but I do have a question.
But where's
Is
Drew?
she
That's my
individually
question.
liable for any of this? Does anyone have an opinion on that? Should she be individually
well,
liable
she probably doesn't
for
have any
making up
money,
a
though.
9,000-word essay
12.
and having it printed in a national magazine, defaming a top-ranked
Well, I would
university
imagine-
and a frat, a national frat?
I imagine on the, you know, she's probably mentioned in the caption there. I would imagine she's
Oh
on the
yeah,
caption.
it's the magazine's owner, and her being sued together. That's
Right.
what it sounds
Okay.
like.
Yeah,
So-
and I'm saying it seems to me, you know, this is pretty. I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, this happened. I mean, it's like a Tawny Brawley. I mean, this happens all the time.
Twana Brawley.
Yeah.
Hey,
So these happen all the
that's
time.
Mr. Al Sharpton's girl.
And then, but I mean, this happens all the time because it's just it's a good headline grabber. But to go as far as to say the dean tried to cover it up, I mean, that's a step further than any other of these scandals that we've seen before.
Yeah, this is the
Writers.
part that I don't really understand about the Rolling Stone. When you're quoting the name of a dean of a major university,
Right,
you would think you would at least talk to that person's press secretary to see if she even ever had an appointment with a woman named Jackie related to some incident
And where
on
is
campus.
Jackie?
That's the
Where-
part I don't
Now
even
the question
understand.
is, okay, so now is Jackie going to be called on the stand now? Are we going to see Jackie?
We're going to have to find out who Jackie is.
Is she going to be subpoenaed? I mean, can they find her, or is Jackie going to disappear like Drew? I mean, maybe Jackie's hiding a sorority and they're hiding Drew
Well,
at the Phi Kappa High.
Well, wait a minute. Well, you know that there's been other writers that have written stories about imaginary people under imaginary conditions that have been. In fact, there was a gentleman about 5 years ago that wrote major stories for the New York Times. It was found out that his stories were all fake about inner city youth and things like that. So we know that this goes on. But the question is there a Jackie?
Yes. So I think she will definitely have to show her face
So
at some point if this moves forward in court, right?
Jackie, you think does exist?
Yes.
He's a person. Drew apparently may or may not exist. We don't know.
Right.
It sounds like to find out whether he exists or ever exists wouldn't be that hard. I mean, you look through school records and look for a Drew, or you know, you could interview those people. So I mean, either he existed and he's on the run, or they're hiding him somewhere, or he never existed.
Well, the whole thing I'm looking at is how could a national ranked magazine decide they're going to print an article without fact checking?
I think it's just too good.
9,000 words is not exactly a blip. And I wanted to thank you both for tonight. And Tierney, thank you for
Thank you.
coming on board and
Thank you.
joining us for Law Talk.